We will deport from Canada anyone here on a visitor visa who carries out any crime. And we will prioritize the deportation of those who carry out hate crimes.
Hello and welcome to the Tungsten Wire. Today's video is going to be about Canadian politics and more importantly, or more specifically, about Pierre Poilievre, the Canadian Conservative leader who is vying to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. Now, a couple weeks ago, Pierre Poilievre had been leading in the polls by a huge margin. If Canadians had gone to the polls, the Conservatives would have had a very strong majority government. Since then, it has dropped down quite a bit, and now the Liberals are in the lead according to the polls. And again, polls don't mean everything. That doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen, but it is a good indicator of public sentiment in the country. And right now, Pierre has lost a huge lead and is now in second behind the Liberals. And the main reason he was seeing so much success was because Canada was tired of Justin Trudeau. Everybody was. Even Liberals, for the most part, were tired of Justin Trudeau. And so he ran on a campaign of Trudeau is bad, we need to get rid of him, we're tired of him. And then axe the tax, and meaning the carbon tax, which a lot of people attributed to the higher cost of living. Now, whether that's right or wrong is a different story. Whether you got more back in rebates than you paid is also a different story that we're not going to get into. But most of Canada was for that platform. But then Justin Trudeau stepped down. And Mark Carney, the new Liberal leader who would become the Prime Minister and is the current Prime Minister of Canada, axed the tax. Or essentially, he brought the consumer tax down to zero. So his whole platform kind of combusted, and he couldn't pivot properly because all he had was slogans: axe the tax, build the home, stop the drugs. But never anything that, how are you going to axe the tax? What are you going to do to build the homes? What are you going to do to stop the drugs? You know what I mean? It was all slogans, very little substance to them. But anyways, it was still working. It was enough. But again, it's slipping down. And then what really seems to have been the final straw was the impeding trade war with America and the tariffs from Donald Trump, and him not being able to capitalize on uniting the country the way it was uniting because of the tariffs. And so he was still being a pretty divisive. And so, a lot of people were getting tired of it. They were like, okay, man, fight for us, stop trying to divide us type thing. That's what we've been seeing online anyways. And so now he's behind in the polls. And so he's taking a harder stance on a lot of things, especially crime. And we're going to watch a video where he talks about something that I believe is going to take us into very, very dangerous waters.
We must stand with the Jewish people and the state of Israel in their effort to preserve their existence and to live a peaceful, democratic life. And that should not be taken for granted. We see on our own streets anti-Semitism, guided by obscene, woke ideologies that have led to an explosion in hate crimes. Hate crimes were up over 100% in Canada before October 7th.
So a couple things. The hate marches, the hate crimes we're seeing of anti-Semitism in the streets that we're seeing he's talking about are the Palestinian protests. Now, the Palestinian protests have not been anti-Semitic. Have there been instances of anti-Semitism? Of course. When you get a crowd of 30,000 people, 5,000 people, even 1,000 people, even 100 people, there's probably going to be some bad actors in there. And they should face consequences for their anti-Semitism. There's no question about that. But the rest of them are well within the law. They're not breaking any laws. They're not committing any crimes. And yet, for some reason, he's calling them anti-Semitism. And then he's stating this flawed statistic, saying that anti-Semitism and hate crimes have been up 251%. That's not exactly true. Reports have gone up 251%. Actual crimes that have led to a conviction have not gone up 251%. And there is a difference between a crime being reported and a crime actually being committed, right? There was a cafe that claimed to have been attacked, and it turned out to be an inside job, though that was an older one. But things like this happen, where there was a lady in a parking lot who reported someone for anti-Semitism because there was an altercation, but they were just mad at her for whatever she had done. They had no idea she was even Jewish, but they were wearing a Palestinian shirt, so she assumed it was anti-Semitic. So it's a flawed statistic. Anyways, we'll keep going.
Now they're up 251%, with Jews being the principal victims of those crimes. We must not just condemn these things, we must take action against them. We must deport from our country any temporary resident that is here on a permit or a visa that is carrying out violence or hate crimes on our soil. It was obscene that the IRGC remained legal.
Okay, when he's talking about the hate crimes, look, if someone commits a violent act, I don't think anybody's against deporting them. We know that people who commit crime without malicious intent, like the Humboldt Humboldt Bronco truck driver who T-boned that bus, he ended up being deported. There was no malicious intent in killing all those kids, right? It was a car accident. I'm not saying that it makes it any better, but there was no malicious intent, and yet he was deported. So people who have malicious intent and commit violence will probably get deported. The other one was the hate crimes part. That's where it gets scary. Because what's a hate crime, right? What's a hate crime? Yeah, discriminating against a Jewish person, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, these are hate crimes. But he subscribes to the IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism. And that includes criticism of Israel. So criticizing Israel, calling them an apartheid state, which they are, according to Amnesty International, saying Israel is committing a genocide, which they are, according to Amnesty International, would be considered anti-Semitism and a hate crime in this guy's eyes. Now that's dangerous. Deporting for being pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli war crimes. What's happening in America is crazy. It's horrible. And nobody should want that in Canada. And that's exactly what he is proposing.
Legal in Canada for 4 years after it killed 55 of our citizens in the attack on PS Flight 752. It is outrageous that 700 IRGC officials are on Canadian soil, many of them living the lap of luxury on the fruits that they stole from their own people. And we must condemn when our own government gives grants for anti-racism to people like Leif Maruth, or appoints Birju Datani to head up the Canadian Human Rights Commission.
This is also really bad. The Birju Datani call out. Birju Datani is a Canadian lawyer and human rights professional who is a senior fellow at the Center for Free Expression at TMU. And he was previously appointed as the Chief Commissioner of the Canadian Human Rights Commission in 2024. Now, he was forced to resign before starting his role due to accusations of anti-Semitism, although an investigation by a third-party law firm found no evidence of anti-Semitism. So he was accused of anti-Semitism. Like I said, 251%. That stat, flawed, because he was accused of anti-Semitism. There was no evidence of anti-Semitism. He knows this. Pierre knows this. And yet he is peddling in misinformation because that's what he does. He likes to divide. He loves to divide. He talks about unity, but he loves to divide.
We must stand up against these outrages and stand for bringing our people together, united in our common values, our common freedom, and our common love for our country and for humanity. Because in the end, we know the Jewish people will prevail. We know the state of Israel will live on. We as Canadians must live on as allies and friends, so that when we say never again, we mean it.
Never again for who? Because it should be never again for anybody. But it's happening right now against the Palestinians. Look, he was talking about unity, peace, we need to bring them together. Most Canadians are not in favor of the genocide in Gaza. Okay? But this guy, his second in command is Melissa Lantsman, who is a huge Zionist, who actually not only went to Israel, but went to the occupied land, East Jerusalem, which is occupied under international law, is considered Palestinian land, and is occupied by Israel. Under Canadian law, what Eastern Jerusalem is under an illegal occupation, and she still went there. With an Israeli flag, by the way. Her and Anthony Housefather. They don't respect Canadian law, let alone international law. Anyways, we'll keep going with what this guy wants to do. Here's another video.
There's been plenty of it in Montreal in the past year and a half from anti-Israel protesters, including recently at Cavendish Mall, where the protesters were able to stay for 2 hours. Police claimed that they couldn't eject them because they hadn't committed a crime, even though there are criminal code provisions that enable them to do so. What would a Poilievre government do to encourage the enforcement of the criminal code in such situations?
We will deport from Canada anyone here on a visitor visa who carries out any crime. And we will prioritize the deportation of those who carry out hate crimes and violence on our streets. Those who are permanent or citizens who do those things, they will go to jail. And they will also, on top of that, there will be massive, crippling financial penalties for hate-based vandalism.
And there you go. Being pro-Palestinian is enough to put you in jail, according to him, in his government. Now, the reporter or activist asking about the 2-hour crime that was happening at Cavendish Mall was actually done by a group called the Jewish Anti-Zionist Action. That's right. It was a bunch of Jewish anti-Zionists who were protesting a screening of October 8th, which is Deborah Messing's documentary calling all the student protests anti-Semitic. So what he's saying right now is that those Jewish anti-Zionists would have been thrown in jail, or deported if they were on a permit, and given crippling fines. That's the government that Mr. Poilievre wants to bring to Canada. Now, here's another article with Poilievre embraces Trump-style demagoguery. Oh my God, can't say the word. Threatens to deport pro-Palestinian protesters. Now, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, in a disturbing echo of Donald Trump's xenophobic playbook, took aim at pro-Palestinian demonstrators during a campaign rally in Ottawa, baselessly accusing them of fueling anti-Semitism and vowing to deport foreigners engaged in what he called criminal hate-mongering. Now, here's the thing. What they're doing is not criminal, and it's not hate-mongering. What they're doing is protesting a genocide that we, the Canadian government, are complicit in. His remarks, a transparent attempt to exploit tensions around the Israel-Gaza war for political gain, signal a dangerous lurch towards authoritarianism in Canadian politics. I mean, we're seeing people all the time in America being disappeared. Mahmoud Khalil, that one Turkish Tufts University person, what was her name? Rumeysa Öztürk, right? They're being disappeared solely for being pro-Palestinian. Mahmoud Khalil has actually spoken out against anti-Semitism in some of these protests, and yet he's been disappeared, and he's a green card holder. And that's what Pierre wants to bring to Canada. Speaking in an Ottawa riding contested by Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney, Poilievre pledged to introduce draconian measures targeting protests, including deportations of visa holders who participate in what he smeared as hate marches. The language was a direct parallel to Trump's crackdown on pro-Palestinian student protesters in the U.S., underscoring Poilievre's willingness to mimic the worst instincts of the American far right, despite his past attempts to distance himself from Trump's extremism. Exactly. Despite his past attempts to distance himself from Trump's extremism, he was like, I'm not Maple MAGA, I'm not Canadian MAGA, I'm not MAGA. And yet here he is saying, I'm going to deport you. I'm going to fine you if you're pro-Palestinian. Straight up MAGA, dude. Poilievre's inflammatory rhetoric ignores reality. While he claims pro-Palestinian demonstrations have caused a spike in anti-Semitism, the vast majority of protests in Canada have been peaceful, with police intervention being the exception, not the rule. His conflation of criticism of Israel's military action, which have killed over 35,000 Palestinians, we know it's more like 300,000, by the way. Many of them women and children, with hate crimes, is a cynical ploy to silence dissent and appeal to hardline voters. And that's another thing. I don't know who he thinks he's going to win with this, right? The people that would be okay with this or are cool with this are obviously going to be voting for him anyways, because fascists like fascism. The conservative leader's outburst came just days after Carney faced backlash from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for acknowledging Canada's limited arms restrictions on Israel, a modest stance that nonetheless drew fury from the far-right Israeli government. When confronted by a protester accusing Israel of genocide, Carney cautiously called for a ceasefire, a position Netanyahu predictably condemned. Poilievre, meanwhile, has offered no meaningful critique of Israel's devastating assault on Gaza, instead choosing to scapegoat protesters exercising their democratic rights. His vow to deport dissenting foreigners in particular is particularly grotesque, echoing the nativist rhetoric of Trump and other authoritarian leaders who weaponize immigration and dissent to stoke fear. Rather than addressing Canada's real challenges, skyrocketing housing costs, crumbling healthcare, and corporate greed, Poilievre is resorting to divisive fear-mongering. His Trumpian turn should alarm Canadians who value civil liberties and reject the politics of demonization. And I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Like brown people, Muslims, Arabs, even brown passing people or Muslim passing people have faced so much racism and so much dehumanization, especially after 9/11, that it's so easy to just say this and people will be like, okay, it's fine. It's fine. You know? Anyways, I've said my piece. What Pierre is trying to do is bring authoritarian fascism to Canada, just like we're seeing in America right now. And I know it sounds like I'm being, a bit over the top calling it fascism, but what do you call an innocent person being deported to El Salvador, even though he had a judge's order that he cannot be deported, and then them saying, well, yeah, it was an accident, but we can't get him back. They're just disappearing people. How is that okay? How is it okay to disappear someone like Mahmoud Khalil, who was a permanent resident, who has a American wife, who's about to have a child? How is that okay? For peacefully protesting the slaughter of his people. Mahmoud Khalil was born in a refugee camp. And anyways, so yeah, the fact that Pierre wants to bring this to Canada should be the grounds to sink his whole candidacy. And I want to be very clear. I'm not totally against a conservative government. I'm against that person being in charge. No, that's not true. I'm against a conservative government. I believe in social democracy, in where social services are available for our most at risk and in need. Anyways, if you like this video, I did ramble a bit. I do apologize. If you like this video, please subscribe. If you agree with me that Pierre Poilievre is trying to bring authoritarianism to Canada, tell me what you think. If you disagree with me, why? What's your proof that he's going to be good for Canada? Anyways, If you like this video, please like it, subscribe, tell a friend, do whatever. Peace be upon you.